Welcome to this edition of Excavating the Bible, a program dedicated to exploring the contributions of archaeologists who work in the Middle East to our understanding of and appreciation for the Bible. I'm Doug Clark. I direct the Center for Near Eastern Archaeology at La Sierra University in Riverside, California, and am joined by two individuals, also from La Sierra University, Dr. Kendra Holoviak-Valentine, Professor of New Testament Studies. I think that's the official title, right? And Dr. Kent Bramlett, who's been part of these conversations as we've gone through the Bible book by book, thinking about archaeology, who is Associate Professor of Archaeology and the History of Antiquity. And we have been working with the New Testament in a sort of different way, not really book by book, because we've got the Gospels and we would be repeating ourselves a lot. And so we're taking kind of the flow of history, kind of combining it and thinking about different regions where Jesus ministered. And that's why we're so glad you're here, Kendra, to help us think about the New Testament and help us think about these books we call the Gospels. And we look forward to your contributions. Kent, the archaeologist, and, well, Old Testament scholar, but New Testament, of course, is important. In fact, you teach a class in New Testament archaeology.
I do.
So does the Galilee kind of draw you to, is this a part of gospel studies that is interesting, intriguing, important?
I do. It's one of my favorite parts.
Yeah.
It's the, the green, rural setting, I think, to some of the more peaceful stories of Jesus. The last week is so intense in Jerusalem. You can't get away from that, the trauma of it all. But in Galilee, it's his teachings, the lessons, the countryside, and I find a lot of object lessons and a lot of places to identify with in the archaeology of the North.
Yeah, and the sea, the water, the streams. Yeah. Kendra, what about you? Is this a place that you are drawn to?
I think some of my students are often surprised at how much of Jesus' life and ministry are located in the region of the Galilee. That it's only that last week of his life where, in the Synoptic Gospels at least, that he goes to Jerusalem. So it's important for us to spend some time in the Galilee.
And it's good. It's a good place.
It's a good place.
It is a beautiful place. As we're thinking about Galilee, we actually are on our second episode dealing with the Galilee. Last time we talked about the western side of the Galilee, this time the north and the northeast. Well, and the east. We're going all the way around on the eastern side. So what we want to do is think about the stories that took place there and any kind of archaeological connections that would help illuminate these stories, that would help us kind of feel the stories better, maybe even capture something of what the first audience would have sensed with Jesus there, or even the audiences that were told the stories, who lived there and who could make some connections we have to travel a long ways to make.
Yes.
So we're looking forward to that. We do have some artifacts on the table in front of us, and Kent, maybe for the first time in a long time, it's not pottery over on your side. Pottery has kind of navigated, it's kind of migrated
down to that
end a little bit. But tell us what you have in front of you.
Well, I like this too. Roman glass. It's something special. If you look at the artistry of it, most of these whole vessels, the whole glass items are found in tombs. Otherwise, they'd be broken almost certainly. And they were typical tomb goods, especially the perfumes. Presumably, they would use the contents in the embalming process, the last rites, and then it seems that became part of the grave goods. But if you look at this, the Romans were accomplished, or I should say the glass artisans in the Roman period were accomplished artists. There were different schools. There was one in Palestine, there was one back in what's now Italy, near Rome, and there seemed to be trade secrets. Now, these aren't the fanciest kinds that they made. There was one kind of glass that would even change color depending on the liquid put into it. Had some metals and stuff dissolved in the glass. Very elaborate. But these are very well done. Glass blown. And the Romans were the first to really accomplish the blowing of glass. So you can see these are shapes that couldn't be produced any other way.
Beautiful vessels.
Yeah.
Now, are they all glass or are they different kinds of glass? I see the bowl in the center.
Well, you mean the forms?
Yes.
The shapes?
material too.
Oh, the material. Well, this one is highly, it needs to be cleaned up, but I think it is glass. The colors come from really the contaminants. And so even if the glass might have been clear at first, most glass that has impurities will turn color over time. And clear glass was actually probably the rarest and most expensive, sought after, but to us, the various colors are highly attractive. And they utilize that too. Some of the appliques of glass stripes, or even utilizing different colors pressed together to make bangles and such. So they did know how to add certain compounds, manganese to make some colors.
Right. Well, Kendra is hoping that she, as an archaeologist, is going to be able to talk about these, right?
We're going to turn
okay,
to
we'll,
you.
Okay, that's a good segue to that. We have several ceramic vessels here, including one that's really quite interesting, certainly used for liquid, the one out in the front here, with a small spout and then a pouring place in the back of it. Whether for domestic or for some kind of cultic use is probably not easy to determine. More likely when you know the context in which it was found. But these were found in tombs as well. And then the typical ribbing. Can't we talk about this ribbing with the Roman ware? And here, a nice jar. And then a small vessel with a little spout and little holes so that one could pour something into this and then carry it without spilling it. So this is mobile. This is something you can carry around. And then a bowl and a flask that we call. And then in the middle is the fragment of a stone weight. It's a basalt stone. Lots of this found in the Galilee. And this might have been a loom weight for weaving, but it's weights like this that were also used for fishing as well. Probably not this big typically, but you've got a net that you need to pull down. And I think, can't we have a net off to your side there too?
We do, not quite 2,000 years old.
No, we wouldn't be able to have it here. We certainly couldn't display it. We wouldn't have it out in the light.
Exactly.
So,
but it represents, of course, our context.
And then some coins. We have several coins. These are authentic coins from the region, and especially around Jerusalem and Judea, where we have coins, Roman coins, representing a number of different characters from the cast of characters of Roman leaders. And then finally, a small glass. It looks like a spoon, probably used in some sort of makeup application process. So very nice, very delicate. Again, extremely well made. You know, we've talked a little bit about these. If we think about what most people would have if you would walk into somebody's house in Hippus, where we're going to go, or Gadara, you'd find a lot of this. Would you find some of this, Kent, in places that would be more high class? Would we see that?
Well, we tend to think of the glass as being expensive, but the distribution is pretty wide. I think the quantity, however, wouldn't be as much as the ceramics. So maybe not limited to elites, but certainly one of the more expensive products that people might purchase.
Yeah. Okay, well, then let's take a look at some illustrations. Thinking about the Gospels and thinking about the ministry of Jesus on the northern and northeastern and eastern shores of the Galilee. And we do so, as always, by creating context. This is chronological context. Now, why have I only highlighted, Kent, one name on this list?
Well, Herod Antipas is the tetrarch of Galilee. So when the kingdom of Herod the Great split up, it was Antipas, the son of Herod, who was appointed by the Romans ruler of that area.
And we have the years here that...
It's a long stretch, isn't it? 4 BC to 39.
It is.
He had more than 40 years of reign.
Okay.
Jesus' whole earthly life.
Yeah, is
was
wrapped up,
under his
pretty much
leadership.
wrapped up in that rule. A new map image here, which I think is quite lovely, and hope that you agree that it illustrates things well.
Very nice.
And so we see again the various divisions. Probably would be better, though, to spell it Judea instead of Judah, and then Idumea to the south, and Samaria we've got. And the Decapolis cities in Perea, we'll be looking at those on another episode, the external regions to Judea. Kendra, we have, as you have told us several times, 4 Gospels. And my question is, do each of these, or do clusters of them, treat Jesus' Galilean ministry in different ways?
They do. Our discussion about the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, focus the majority of Jesus' life and ministry in this region that we're talking about this evening, around the Galilee. John's Gospel will have Jesus also in the region of the Galilee, but heading down to Jerusalem 3 times. So it's different how they treat this space. It's also interesting that in Mark's Gospel, this is also true of Matthew, that there will be a pivotal moment in the Gospel story that takes place in some of the region we'll be looking at today, Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus is letting the disciples know that he's headed to a cross.
Right.
So that takes place at in this region that we're discussing.
That's right, in the north. So we want to kind of keep those in mind, and I'm assuming that literarily, where you spend a lot of your time, where the author spends a lot of the time, would emphasize the importance of ministry, or importance of the book, or importance of the message behind the book.
Right.
So we can assume that. Well, several events that the gospel stories tell us about the northern and eastern part. So we've got Chorazin in the north, Bethsaida and Gadara. We will be talking about Gadara and how we think about that in connection with the swine, the pigs, and the demoniacs and so on. The feeding of the 5,000 on the west, and compare that to the feeding of the 4,000 on the eastern side. And then, as you mentioned, the events at Caesarea Philippi. So we will be thinking about all of those. Okay, big debates about the Gadarenes, or the Gerasenes, or the Gerasenes. And this has something to do with where the story of the swine took place. Give me your best shot. Where did it happen? And what's the debate about?
So
Yeah,
I'll
jump in.
put my 2 cents
And then
out
I'll
there.
correct you.
Sure, sounds good to me. That's the joy of going first. You can be corrected
That's
if you're
right,
wrong.
that's right.
Well, it's sort of all of those. I mean, these are cities that are known to various degrees that are in the Decapolis. So how does the author of the book identify where this happened? The pigs probably didn't run out of the village, I mean, or the city. They're in the countryside, the region of one of those. And so it's like when I travel, people ask me where I'm from. If I think they know the state of Washington very well, this is growing up and traveling in early years, I would say the name of my small town. If they're from further away or back east, I might say, well, in southwest Washington. But if I'm abroad, I would say, well, near Seattle. I would never tell someone from the state that I'm near Seattle. It's a couple hours away. And if I'm abroad, then if they say, oh, yes, the White House, Washington, you know, I sort of make a judgment.
Right.
And if I,
Right.
you know, I might just shrug my shoulders and say, yeah, America. And that's as close as we can get. So I think with these stories, it depends. I think the pigs were probably close to Gergesa, perhaps. But I think Gadara was the regional site that most people would know. There was a famous philosopher whose works were in the papyri, the villa of the papyri at Herculaneum that came from Gadara. But maybe Gerasa was known in other communities. So they all work for me in certain ways.
Depending on how they're reported,
Right.
context,
Right.
intention behind the reporting.
Such a great example with where you're from. That's such a great example. I would also say that in Mark's telling of the story, he talks about the land of. And that word land could be understood as emphasizing the country or region around a city or a village. And so that we're emphasizing the space that's rural as opposed to the village. And it seems to me, given the rest of the story, that that could be part of what we're getting a heads up about, too.
Okay, well, then let's look at some of these sites and think about where they connect. And we're going to do so through some of the artifacts first. Boats, anchors, net weights, household items, coins, and so on. I think you spent some time, Kent, in the Galilee region.
Yep, used to
and may have been to this place.
Used to go
several times.
swimming off that area. Night swimming by moonlight sometimes, in fact. But that's a boat that best represents the class or the type of boat that Jesus and the disciples rowed in. Could hold about 15 people, had a covered stern, you could hoist a sail, but largely you just rowed it around.
Now, there is at least an attempt at a replica here. I think this is also at the Ginusar, right? At the
I think it is.
kibbutz.
Yeah.
No, actually, this one is across the river at Ein Gev, but it's been a long time since I've been to either, and so I don't recall if there's one now at Ginusar on the west. In any case. And then this picture, I love this picture, probably 19th century, and a nice depiction of people working out on the lake fishing. Anchors. You had to anchor, so you carry this big heavy stone, and these are huge stones.
They are.
Throw them overboard and you'd stay in one place. Smaller stones used for net weights.
And those are pretty universal. Wherever you have fishing, Native Americans in the West Coast, they used perforated stones like these.
Right. And coins. We talked about some coins that we have on the table in front of us. Here is an example called a Panias coin, related to the site. I don't know Roman coins that well, but at least I can read parts of it over on the left there, where it's getting close to showing that place of origin. And if you look carefully, the figures in the temples inside, the one on the right appears to be Pan, the god Pan, this mixed goat and human being. So there's good reason.
They represent, presumably, realistically, the temples that were built at the site. And archaeologists have excavated the foundations, so we have some sense of their size.
Right. Okay, well, this is what the tourists go to the Sea of Galilee for, right? The Christian tourists. Okay, or maybe not. But it is everywhere. And of course, what were these fisher people, the fishermen, the disciples, going after? But fish. So it's an important part. Any evidence of the production of the fish sauce around the Galilee?
Oh, certainly. Well, by the way, St. Peter's fish that they market is what, tilapia, and it's not even native to the
That's right.
to the
These were
sea.
introduced.
But sure, they did process garum, which was a Roman staple. It's like sauerkraut to traditional Germans, or kimchi, I guess, to Korean cuisine. But garum was this fermented fish, and it smelled terrible to those who didn't consume it. And the Magdala, where Mary Magdalene came from, just a little bit further west, southwest, was named after a migdal, or a tower that was for the production of this garum. So it was certainly a big industry around the lake.
Okay. Well, then let's take a look at the locations. Go to some of these places. Some of them mentioned in the gospel accounts, some of them not, but in the region. And archaeologically, we like to think of regionally.
Yes.
And so we'll first of all go to Chorazin. And the map here shows the locations on the western side, but we do see a couple of them like Chorazin and Bethsaida in the northern part of the Sea of Galilee, and then Caesarea Philippi way up in the north. We'll come back to that. An interesting map, a different sort of way of looking at it. What do we have around the Sea of Galilee here?
We can get an idea of the shape. It's a kinneret in Hebrew, the lyre or harp.
Harp, something like
Right. And most of the sites that are mentioned in the Gospels, we've already mentioned, are on the western side. But you can clearly see that there are settlements pretty well distributed evenly around the entire sea. It's not a huge circumference, 33, 34 miles around. One could bike around it in a day quite easily, bicycle. But the geography is quite different. The wider beaches are on the western side, and on the eastern side, it's more constrained by the cliffs, the Golan Heights, as we know them today, where they drop down. There's a fairly narrow shelf that gives way to the sea.
Now, this does illustrate the sort of activity that's going on across the lake, too, with I don't know that anybody particularly maintained a marine route like we've got here, but at least the traffic between the places would be illustrated well. Okay, Chorazin. Jesus, as far as we know, didn't go to Chorazin. At least we're not aware of that, right?
We just have the woe against Chorazin that Jesus spoke against 3 of the cities, but I don't think we have a story that's located there.
It's very nicely preserved, what has been excavated. So you have the site, a mikveh, or a Jewish ritual bath here with the steps down. Some way there would be continually flowing water to keep it fresh coming through. And then just one of the house, parts of a house structure. And then a courtyard. And a lot of the activities for food preparation happened in courtyards. And so we've got the grinder there. And then it looks like the cap maybe of a well or something like that, or a cistern, perhaps. And the synagogue. The synagogue is terrific. I think the synagogue at Chorazin is one of the, I mean, it's not complete, but it is so artfully put together, and it is extremely aesthetically pleasing. And like we saw at Magdala, some kind of a table, some kind of, related to the synagogue, related to some kind of worship setting? Is that what we have, Kent? Do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. And again, you see motifs that are, well, the iconography would be particular representative here of trees on each side, trees of life probably. And so this is probably, again, where the ark or the box that contained the Torah scrolls would be located.
Now we move to the east along the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, looking toward Bethsaida. What's important about Bethsaida or Bethsaida? How do we include this into the gospel story? What happens here?
Well, we have,
Sorry.
go ahead this time.
One of the things that I find intriguing about it is that when Jesus sends his disciples to go there, and instead they end up with a storm at sea and never get there. And so it's one of those places where Jesus wanted to start his ministry, to expand his ministry, but they don't get there until several chapters later, at least in Mark's account.
Yeah, it's an interesting
And it is. It's
component.
one of those places where you wonder what might have happened had they not ended up going back to Jewish territory after their fear, their fright on the sea.
Kent, I think you were going to add.
Well, I was just going to say that politically it seems to be a boundary that they have to cross from Capernaum to Bethsaida. The west of the Jordan River is part of Herod Antipas's territory of Galilee, whereas to the east it's Philip's.
Right. So if we look at the site, right in the center of the picture is the site of Bethsaida. It's been excavated, but most of what they found here, and there are different candidates for the site, but most of what they found here is from an earlier time period, the time of the Old Testament, the Iron Age, with the gate and the stela standing here, the image is to the right, and the standing stones at the gateway. But then...
Possibly the capital of Gesher, where Absalom's mother comes from.
Yeah. Well, and then what we have here, at least the archaeologists would suggest, is a fisher person's house, a fisherman's house. You can't see anything from this picture, which is kind of aimed in the direction of the tumble of stones here. And then Gamla, which is not mentioned except in Josephus.
Josephus has quite a bit to say because it was one of the cities where there was resistance to the Romans during the revolt, just like Masada, so the Romans broke through.
Well, and you can see what happens to resistors here. So
it's pretty graphic.
But the synagogue is spectacular in Gamla. And the valley, looking over the valley, another mikveh, Jewish ritual bath. And then Hippos. Now, okay, one of the cities, one of the Decapolis cities along the eastern shore. Some people would connect this in one way or another to the story of the pigs and of the demon-possessed people. From a later time period, the Christian period, the Byzantine period, is this church and another church as well, up in the highlands. Okay, so here's the place people say might work well for pigs falling into the sea. What are you gonna make of that? I mean, it shows up in all the illustrations. It's steep and
it's the steepest you get on the eastern side the Sea of Galilee. It doesn't get any steeper than that. So you can imagine the herds running down, rampaging, sort of like lemmings maybe plowing into the water. But they're not going to tumble off like my childhood storybook showed the pigs upside down and spinning through the air. That endlessly fascinated me. But they would have to be on their legs running, I think.
Okay.
And I might emphasize that Josephus lets us know that this whole region, this whole area, was sort of taken over by Roman legions. And maybe that's part of the backdrop. By the time Mark's writing, maybe that's part of the backdrop too, of hearing that name Legion and wondering, is this man possessed/dispossessed because of what Rome is doing to this territory and the
people would make a
persecution.
connection like that fairly quickly.
I think those hearing Mark's gospel would.
Oh, okay, excellent. Now we go to Kersey, a place that people would, well, it's close to what we just saw.
At the foot of the hill there.
That's right. And so a Byzantine church, again, later than the Roman period, but nevertheless, probably 6th century, something like that. And there is another picture. And then from across the sea, looking at Hippas. So from here, it looks like everything is steep.
It does.
So maybe that works okay. And it took them a little while to get to the sea, perhaps, so the story should be told. But then we move to the very southern part, and we're looking to the west, up to the hills of Jordan. And what should we find
from
up
the
on
west.
that hill? Yeah, looking, that's right, looking to the south and
East.
Thank you.
Well, up on the top of the ridge, there was a very nice city called Gadara. And from there, you get a beautiful view of most of the lake. And this is then, from there on down, Gadara's district went all the way to that southeast corner of the sea. So you could rightly say that they were in the land of the Gadarenes and relate it to this well-known city.
It's a great place to visit. I mean, a great Roman city to visit. But then to see the Galilee at the same time. Would you think that this is more likely the place that the region is named for, and that we should think about this place? Or you'd actually talked about Gerasa or Jerash further south. How should we think about this if we wanted to slip out of our shoes into some ancient sandals and hear the story?
That Jesus, for me, it's that Jesus goes to this region that was well beyond his neighborhood, well beyond Jewish villages, and he crosses that sea barrier into Gentile territory. I find that very moving.
Okay, really good. Some other things from Gadara. I do want to end up with this slide, Caesarea Philippi. We'll not have time to visit the site itself, but it's an important one because of this major shift. And that major shift turns, in a way, the cosmos, history, so much turns on that encounter with Peter.
He's headed to
and the
Jerusalem.
disciples, right. Thank you, Kendra. Thank you, Kent. And thank all of you for joining us for this episode of Excavating the Bible. We hope this has provided something for you to think about and to increase your faith, and we look forward to next time. Until then, think ancient, keep believing, and keep exploring.